Okay, great. So we've actually got quite a few of the attendees trickling in. So I think it's time to get things started. So welcome again to our webcast on the future of workplace, air quality and occupancy. So by means of introductions, I'm going to introduce myself and our panelists that we have today. So I'm Shivaun Ryan, and I'm going to be the host for today. And we're also lucky to be joined by Alex Birch and Stanton Wong. So I'll just give a quick overview and bio to both of our speakers that we've got with us today. So Alex is the co-founder and CEO of XY Sense, the innovative workplace sensor solution, helping property teams unlock 100% anonymous live occupancy data and connect it to a universe of workplace applications. Having previously co-founded and led APAC operations for the IWMS platform CeraView, now known as Eptura, Alex has over 20 years experience developing enterprise real estate and workplace SaaS solutions for the world's leading companies. A serial prop tech entrepreneur and engineer by trade, Alex is passionate about the intersection between data, office utilization, and workplace experience. Welcome, Alex. And we also have with us Stanton Wong. So Stanton is the president of Reset, and as a pioneer of the green building standards and performance-based certification, Stanton leads Reset in setting benchmarks for indoor air quality, health and sustainability in buildings worldwide. His expertise for environmental health and innovative sensor technology makes him a key voice in the global movement towards healthier and more sustainable places. We're excited to learn some of his insights today. So welcome, Stanton, as well. Great. So what we're going to cover today, we have quite a few different topics that we're going to go through. So what is the current state of play of air quality in our office spaces? And what is the impact of air quality on how we feel and how productive we are? Then we're going to have a look at some of the latest workplace compliance standards and smart building certifications. So these aren't just fancy titles or tick boxing exercises. They're actually more helping companies create healthier and safer environments for their teams. We're going to also explore combining air quality data with occupancy data so we can unlock a whole new world of possibilities. Then we're going to touch on how workplace analytics can bring to light things like poor airflow or excessive noise and how that's actually going to impact our workplaces and productivity. And as always, we'd love for this to be an interactive session. So please don't hesitate with any of the questions that you might have as we go along, but we'll also have a Q&A in the background. So you can use the Q&A function within the webinar to go through any of that. So first of all, I'd like to just pass over to Stanton to actually give an overview of Reset.
Thank you very much, Shivaun. So I'll give a quick intro. We're not going to go too in depth because we're going to kind of go through more of this throughout this webinar. Reset is a performance and data focused standard, which means that what we care about is the performance of the building rather than what solutions have been implemented. And so, for example, in regards to air quality, we're looking at continuous monitoring. So there should be sensors in the space instead of a spot test because we need to know more about how the building is performing over time. And this is in consideration for if we really care about health, if we really care about air quality, we have to think about the air quality during the time that people are in the space, not just an initial test, because air quality is variable. It doesn't stay the same all the time. So our focus has always been more on performance. Air quality is one with water, energy, and circularity, which we've changed to the term to call waste. All of these are focused around continuous monitoring, so data acquisition, performance related stuff. And then on the embodied side, there's a lot more talk in the EU about embodied carbon. That's also very quantitative. Our approach is how do you get the data behind all the materials and then make it so that it's measurable and able to be benchmarked and set KPIs around.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction, Stanton. So jumping into one of the things we want to talk about is why air quality, why now, and why is it actually important to workplace leaders today? So when we think of air quality and pollution, we can see one visual of, you can see very tangible, what we might call air there, of what we can actually see of just that more smoggy, people associate that with bad air. And then versus what we actually see in workplaces. This is, you can see the clearer image on the right-hand side of an office space, that we don't necessarily always equate bad air quality with an office space or an indoor environment. But it is important to also look at, okay, well, we can't see it, but what is actually happening with the air quality in indoor environments? So this is always a really interesting statistic that we do see, that maybe not on the top of people's minds, that inside the indoor air quality can be 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor environments, especially in office spaces around VOCs that are actually expelling into the indoor environment, coming from the items that we're putting in there. So Stanton, like, what do you think about this? Is this, you obviously see this in your day to day, but do you find a lot of people are getting as surprised when they come across these statistics of what the normal quality of indoor air is?
Yeah, I think for the first picture you showed just now is a very kind of strong visual representation of how people think about this. Air quality is typically something you think of as an outdoor thing. And so if there's bad outdoor air quality, let's say last year during the wildfires, you could see the sky was burning red. Your first reaction is, let's close the window and we're safe. Like, it won't come in. The reality, though, is that most buildings are not 100% airtight, and most buildings are typically negatively pressurized, which means that it is sucking in the air from outside in some way. And so what you're encountering for outdoor air pollution coming in is it's delayed by a couple hours, maybe 12 hours. And after 12 hours, there's going to be enough of the outdoor air that's come in that you have the same kind of outdoor air quality, same indoor air quality as outdoor air quality. So that's the first part. The second part, as you've been mentioning with VOCs, this is actually a bigger problem now than before, because our buildings are getting better designed. It's becoming more airtight, so there's less air leakage between the indoor and outdoor environments. And what this means is, if you have any kind of bad quality material that's off-gassing, let's say formaldehyde, which is a very known VOC that's dangerous. Before, if you tend to have your windows open, or you have a leaky building, the air just gets diluted by itself. But with better design, that air gets stuck inside. And so you're getting in indoor environments that are potentially much worse than outdoor, because you have these other pollutants. And when you have occupancy, when you have people inside a space moving around, bringing stuff in, there's always potential for more pollution in the air. And thus, that's why there's a likelihood of much higher pollution in indoor environments than outdoor environments.
Yeah, and I think like one of the big learning curves I went through on this is learning like furniture off gases, and new furniture always has that off gases of VOCs, which people don't always expect. Obviously some manufacturers and providers worse than others, but we won't get into that today.
And sometimes we really like that smell. The new car smell is technically VOC off gassing.
Yeah, our brains are trained to love it, that the fact of some car washes actually provide that as the marketing of, do you want new car smell? good,
Yeah.
good for your nose, but not good for your health and well-being. So I think as well, moving on, because we can get stuck on some of these conversations forever, because it is such a fascinating topic. But obviously touching again on, it is like we spend 90% of our time indoors, and indoor air quality is actually so crucial, not just for our health, but also our productivity. So again, sometimes hard to correlate that, but we all sit in meetings and think maybe it's the content we're zoning out of, but it can actually be the fact that there's a lot of people in the space. So I think there's a lot of different things here we have on this side of that's actually impacting from different air quality and also occupancy as well. So at XY, if you've been to any of our webinars or talks before, you'll know we quite love a bit of data. So we're going to go through some of the data of what we're seeing right now and some of the research that we've done. So about 72% of office workers are concerned about the air quality in their workplace. and many fear that poor IAQ could adversely affect their health, citing issues like respiratory problems and fatigue. And additionally, 89% of workers believe that air quality directly benefits their physical health. I think we've probably seen a massive upshift in this in the last few years, just given the amount of highlights we've had around indoor air quality and illness with the pandemic that we did have. And then sick building syndrome might be a new thing to some people, but this can be attributed to poor IAQ and increased sick leave by up to 60%. And this can cost businesses significantly in terms of absenteeism. Then when it comes to cognitive function, that we're seeing indoor air pollution can really reduce this. So for instance, a Harvard study found that increasing ventilation by 20% can improve cognitive performance by around 6%. Another study noted that a 500 micrograms per cubic meter increase of VOCs can lower cognitive scores by 13%. And that's really going to have an impact on decision making, productivity, and just the way we go about our day-to-day in our office spaces. Sorry, these slides. And then beyond health concerns, indoor air quality can reduce the cost of running a building through building automation and condition-based monitoring. So again, there's a lot of different facets and vectors that indoor air quality can actually have an impact in. So things like demand control ventilation is a well-known example of air quality monitoring, integrating into a HVAC system. And the technology ventilation rates can vary based on the carbon dioxide concentrations that directly correlate to occupancy. So this way, when a space is not being occupied, the ventilation rates are minimized to save energy. And a Harvard study found that efficient IAQ management can reduce building energy use by up to 20% through optimized ventilation systems. So Stanton, that's quite a lot to consider there, quite a lot of stats, quite a lot of implications for indoor air quality. But do you think workplace leaders should consider these impacts when forming their own workplace strategies?
I think they should. So you've touched upon a lot of reasons why it's important. The hard part for a lot of workplace leaders is how do you measure this impact? So productivity, there's scientific research backing this by Harvard, but in a real life environment, how do you measure this productivity? It's very difficult, especially for office related jobs. And then absenteeism, it will be actually quite exciting to see more offices start to track this. And I know XYSense occupancy data will help provide this. And the reason for this is because COVID, I think, was one of the silver linings was it woke up a lot of people to understanding how a lot of viruses are passed from individuals. And a lot of it, as mentioned earlier, is through indoor air. So if you have really static air and you have very little fresh air coming into a space, diluting the air, it's possible that whoever is sick with the flu, they cough into the air, the viral particles stay in the air for a while, and people walking through breathe some of that in. That's how it passes on to the next person. And so having good air quality, and you can having good air quality, and we should be doing more A/B tests on this. I think some companies, if they really want to measure this difference, they can, with one office having a system and one office not having a system in place for air quality, and they'll see how this gets impacted throughout the year. And I think the biggest thing that we're going to see moving forward is actually from an energy perspective. Air quality and energy costs is very, very heavily tied because if, let's say, you have low occupancy in a space, you don't actually need to bring in as much fresh air. So automation for this and everything is actually a big part for how to deal with air quality. And air quality is, in some ways, it's really simple because for every pollutant, there's a very simple way to solve for. It just comes down to, is someone automating the process? If we're talking about bringing in fresh air, when do you need to bring in fresh air? You can have it on 24/7, or you can have it on when CO2 is very high, or alternatively when occupancy is very high. So there's ways to kind of leverage the technology. It hasn't been done as ubiquitously as we want yet. Real estate tends to be slightly slower in adopting new technologies, but these are all ways to really kind of push forward. And the reason why I mentioned energy is because we're seeing a lot more talk around sustainability. And previously, the scenarios that I've seen is if you want to lower energy costs, you just turn off your air quality systems because very few people feel it immediately. And this results in really bad air quality and just systems that are supposed to be running, not running at all. Or another example is your filters are completely clogged. So you're bringing in supposedly a certain amount of fresh air, but you're not actually bringing anywhere near that because there's a blockage of air being able to come in. So measuring air quality, measuring how your system's operating, all of that kind of hits everything. And the last thing I'll mention is I think the big push will be from a sustainability perspective because there's going to be more and more reporting requirements around energy consumption. And so for example, in New York, there's the local law 97 where buildings are actually required to hit certain energy targets. That is going to become, I think, a leader in terms of energy policy. And if we're targeting energy efficiency, then automation, understanding air quality systems in comparison to energy costs, all of that's going to be a big part of how we solve for these.
Awesome. It is fascinating. I think like the one big thing of when we talk about automation is we're getting a wider degree of like IoT connected devices and inputs that can come into some of these platforms. And sometimes that can be overwhelming as well of, okay, for the first time, we've got in newer buildings, we've got access to all these different data points and what like that, we've got options now of what we can send to a BMS platform for controls. So it's a fantastic time to actually see some solutions coming through here. So then we want to touch on, okay, more the human element of, okay, employees do really care. Like we're seeing a lot more of this since the pandemic of there's a lot more awareness to air quality and people want to know they're coming into environments that have and actually are actively monitoring their the indoor air quality. So a few more kind of stats and data points that we have here. So a recent Honeywell survey showed that nearly 90%, so nearly all of the workers considered at least somewhat important to be kept informed of their building air quality. And this includes 65% who actually consider it very or extremely important. So that's quite a high number of people wanting access to some of this data. And then we're seeing 60% of employees who are also willing to leave their jobs if employers fail to address IAQ issues, that employees value a healthy work environment. So we've also did some of the research of like, okay, well, how many respondents are actually getting access to the data? And there's about a third, so 29% of surveyed C-level executives receive this data frequently. And then only 13% of non-C-levels are actively informed. So there's about 2/3 of people who are rarely or never seeing any of this data for their workplace. So Alex, that's quite a significant gap there, don't you think?
Yes. Yeah. First off, hey everyone, it's great to be here. First time I'm getting the opportunity to talk, but I've been loving listening to the experts talk. So fascinating conversation so far. But yeah, to the question, it is a huge gap. And I guess you look to the question, why is it such a big gap? And democratizing air quality data is not an easy thing to do. There's a few reasons why not. In terms of measuring what is good and what is bad and having indexes on that, and then having that compared across different buildings is certainly quite the challenge. Then actually transparently, some organizations look at air quality and think, well, how does that help from the CFO perspective of the bottom line? What's the ROI? And how can you quantify and justify ROI when you're talking about productivity of people? But there are, I mean, we've already heard today a number of reasons why air quality does enhance the productivity of the people to make the businesses more successful. So there's definitely a big correlatory effect there. And then the last one is interpreting the data. In my opinion, how many parts per billion is good or bad for volatile organic compounds? I'm sure Stanton knows the answer in his sleep. But to democratize that, really, it needs to be simplified and made accessible to everyone. So there's a long way to go, but the toolkit is there to be able to measure it definitely now.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. And we got to you eventually in the flow of all the conversations, but chime in whenever you feel you want to add something as well. So I think as well, it's okay. We've talked about some of the stats of what's happening with air quality. We've spoken a little bit about what employees are wanting, but then how are workplace teams actually adapting? So Stanton, I might pass to you on this as well, that like you're obviously working with a lot of leaders globally trying to tackle this. And even in our own work at XY Sense, we're seeing a lot more of our customers wanting access to this data. There's definitely a big uptick we're seeing in the demand for these type of solutions and getting access. But how have you seen this space change in the last few years?
I think the biggest change that I've seen the last couple of years is that the technology availability is becoming more accessible. And so a bit of history, there was the reason why we started Reset Air was actually because of an employee suing their embassy, as in this was an employee that worked in an embassy. And the embassy didn't have any data to back anything up, but the employee bought a cheap sensor to start measuring air quality. And this was all kind of when China had that big explosion on the fog outside was not fog, but it's actually pollution. So people started caring. And in China, there's not much suing going on. But in this case, because this was a foreign embassy, they sued their employer. And basically, there was a big kind of situation there. And that embassy reached out to us to ask, how can we actually resolve this? How can we set up a system where we're measuring air quality so we can guarantee that the space that we have is healthy, because it's now an obvious issue. What I'm trying to illustrate here is air quality is now an issue that a lot of people know about. It's not just people in real estate, it's not just the experts, it's more of an issue that everyone kind of has a general understanding of, that bad air quality is bad for my health. And if I'm in a space with bad air quality, that's long-term detrimental. So in that scenario, I think, number one, there's a lot more awareness. So not just from the landlord side or the kind of HR side, but from the employee side, which is going to push a lot of people to a lot of offices towards really starting to think about this. The other part, which I was mentioning earlier, was as this kind of ecosystem evolves, where there's more interest and demand for it, there will be more companies who will be able to offer the service. And the difference between continuous monitoring and a spot test is that a spot test, you can have a team come in, do it once, and they're gone. So a lot of the equipment that you buy for that, it's simpler. It's not as long-term and permanent. But with continuous monitoring, we're looking at hardware that needs to be newly developed because it doesn't exist in that area of the world. And then the other thing is you need to have software platforms that can host all this data and then display it for users. Without that initial kind of setup, it's impossible to really have automated systems because you don't have the data to automate with. So in the last 2 or 3 years, I would say, because of the additional awareness, the additional demand for air quality, we're now seeing a lot more companies and services offering air quality monitoring, offering solutions that are tying it with the data that's collected, and platforms that can actually easily display data to tenants or occupants of a space.
Yeah, it's very similar to occupancy as well, of like the old ways of doing occupancy data was like getting potentially students to come around with clipboards, count people every hour. Then by the time companies collated all that data, the trends might have changed. And like it is just how do we move to make this more efficient, rather than it's set and forget of do it once and then do we know if what's happening next year is going to be following the same pattern. It's a very, 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 very similar history and experience curve with occupancy as well. So what I'd love to go into as well, of we possibly jumped straight into the acronyms earlier in the in this webinar, but there's a lot of acronyms when it comes to air quality. when you first start looking into the space, it can be a bit overwhelming of what do all of them mean? What do they mean to people, and what are they? So Stanton, I'd love to just pass over to you being the expert and just talk us through some of the different components of when we're measuring air quality, what are we actually talking about?
Yep. So in the reset standard, we focused on the parameters that are shown here. So PM2.5, and sorry, the reason we chose these is because each one of them target a different part of air quality and your solution for it. So particulate matter is basically dust, very small particles in the air. And this can be generated off of just us rubbing our t-shirts or whatever on something, and the dust that comes out of it, including skin and everything, that's all particulate matter. And PM2.5 is specifically particulate matter that's smaller than 2.5 micrograms, micrometers, I think. In any case, it's small enough. And the reason why we care about PM2.5 and not PM5 and 10 is because PM2.5 is small enough that once you breathe it in, there's the hairs in your esophagus that normally can push some of the particulate matter out. It's too small now for it to kind of help get it out. So it stays in your lungs and gradually gets absorbed into your bloodstream. So if it's organic matter that's in your lungs, not that big of a deal, but sometimes it's heavy metals, and heavy metals going into your blood is potentially poisonous. And so this is something that we should think about. And smaller particles, there's less research done on it so far, but has the same issue where once you breathe it in, it stays inside and you get it gets absorbed into your bloodstream. So the solution for particulate matter is normally around filters. So if you have filters, either from bringing fresh air into the building or recirculating filters because you have polluted air in your space, that's the main way to kind of resolve it. So particulate matter measurements, PM2.5 measurements, can be used to automate filtration systems to clean the air. So that's one piece. Volatile organic compounds, VOCs, these are off-gassing chemicals. Some are toxic, for example, formaldehyde, benzene, etc. A lot of these are tied to furniture. So certain paints or varnishes or glues might have these compounds in it to make it a better product for its usage, but it ends up off-gassing the air for a certain amount of time. So without measurements, some of these VOCs are actually, you can't smell it. There's not that kind of disgusting feeling of VOCs that you sometimes can smell. And so you could be potentially breathing in a lot of poisonous VOCs because it's trapped inside. So if your windows are always open, not a big deal. But if your windows are not always open, then it's possible that you're accruing a lot of VOCs in an indoor environment. There is a false positive here because sometimes VOCs technically also includes alcohol. So if you're popping a bottle on a Friday afternoon because you're celebrating, that can also show up on VOC sensors. So there's a bit of knowledge to kind of understand what the reading means. There are thresholds designed through other standards, and we've been pointing at them so far. What we've started to realize is that for VOC, it's more of a trend indicator. You want to use it to understand, is your VOC going higher and then staying there? Because then you've introduced something into the space. An example that we saw before was there was a company that installed a whiteboard into their office, and in the data, they saw a week later, they looked at the data and saw that VOC went up and stayed up. And they failed that month. So they asked us what's going on. We asked them what changed in your office. And they said, they looked through the historical records on like what was happening in their office. They found out they installed this whiteboard. And what they found out was the glue that was used by the contractor was off-gassing VOCs. So they took the whiteboard down, they scraped off all the glue, and then a day later, you could see that the VOC data went back down to normal before this incident. So that would be a use case for how you would consider VOCs. VOCs target really the material choice of your office space or your indoor space, what you've used. And the one kind of reason that you want this long-term is a lot of materials, they have a layer that they put on top that covers whatever the whatever a potential off-gassing element might be. So for example, let's say there's a varnish layer that does have formaldehyde, they'll paint something over that traps it. And over time, if people are rubbing on it, or if you're cleaning it with alcohol, whatever, and you rub that upper layer away, then it starts off-gassing. So there are some situations where, let's say you've used something for a year, it was supposed to off-gas for a week in the beginning and then never off-gas again. But after a year or two, because you've been using it for so long, it's possible that at that point, that's when it starts off-gassing. So having long-term understanding of this with a sensor to help you is a good way to mitigate this risk. Lastly, CO2 is focused around fresh air systems. So carbon dioxide is not necessarily dangerous or poisonous to your body unless it's at very, very high levels, 5,000 and above. But it's a great proxy to understand, is your fresh air system working? Are you bringing in the fresh air? Is your filter completely blocked? That kind of stuff. And so targeting these three things are ways to look at filtration, which is the solution, choice of what you bring into your space, which is another solution, and your fresh air systems, which is another solution. Temperature and humidity are things that can affect VOC readings and particulate matter, and so we always recommend having that. And if you care about indoor air comfort, then these are things that you should always consider as well.
Yeah, that's a lot of information there.
Sorry.
I was taking some notes there because I've learned some new stuff, but I think like it's the big takeaway is these kind of what's the data showing us, but then what's happening in the real world of like the data is going to pinpoint if something's wrong, but then asking the people in the space, well, like that, what's changed? And the alcohol popping is a new one for me. I did not know that. That's so that's an interesting one to kind of add to my repertoire of notes of what's impacting indoor air quality. And even that's fascinating with the off-gassing over time. That's yeah, some really, really interesting stuff here. So again, we've spoken about what we're measuring, but then there's obviously a few different ways. We've touched on this a little bit already, but like what are the benefits in different ways that we can look at measuring indoor air quality, Stanton, and what are the benefits about these methodologies that our workplace leaders should be considering?
So if most traditional building standards that are in the market, they already require one-off air quality testing. And the main issue, actually, Shivaun, can you see if the next slide might have a visual picture? Okay, perfect. So if you're doing, most companies who are going for some kind of certification, they want to pass. They're not doing this and thinking, let's take the risk of potentially not passing. So they're always going to choose the most optimal time to test if it's a one-off test, because you know like when it's how long the test is going to be, for example, 4 to 8 hours, and you can control for that to a certain extent. So in every interior design or construction situation, there's the construction and then there's a flush out before you have occupancy. This is to clean out the air and everything. And so if you're doing a spot test, if you care about passing, you will never do it not at the flush out phase, because that's the time when you can guarantee that you'll pass. The issue with one-time tests then is you don't know what happens afterwards. You don't know during occupancy, all your fresh air systems actually turned on. Do you have filters installed? Just a fun story, in residential spaces, people who buy filters, that standalone units that you put on your floor, I've seen situations where people turn it on and they've been running it for 6 months, and then sometimes they look at the data and think, the air quality is still so bad, why? And they open it up and find out they never took off the plastic wrap on the filter. So there's situations like that where it's just man-made error, where systems weren't running properly. So without data to kind of see what's going on, occupancy phase, potentially you have bad air quality. So the big difference with continuous monitoring and a spot test is, spot test, there is a very strong use case for it if you're trying to determine exactly what the pollution is. But if you want to understand how you're doing over time from a performance perspective, especially when people are in the space, continuous monitoring is the way to go.
Yeah, it is fascinating of just the difference. So like, are you finding with when they're doing testing, the flush out phase, that's what is that before furniture goes in usually? Or would furniture usually be in that instance?
Furniture would be in, but for example, if you're doing a spot test, you're not gonna be surprised when the spot test happens. And so even if you have potentially off-gassing furniture, off-gassing doesn't happen immediately, as in it's over time in an enclosed space. And so if you do a spot test on the first day, right after you had your windows all open, flushing out everything, and you close your windows and you start your test, in the first 8 hours, it might not be obvious as to how much off-gassing there might be. So that would be the scenario where you wouldn't know until afterwards.
Yeah, okay. No, it's awesome. And I think, yeah, what you're kind of leading on to is that just continuous monitoring, so you can be proactive of addressing issues as they arise rather than just doing the tick the box of we've done this at the right time and we know everything's good.
Yep.
So I think just moving on then to the natural evolution of this, of like, why are we all here today, of like air quality is an issue. Us at XY Sense obviously focus predominantly on occupancy in this space, but have been really leaning into air quality. It's where a lot of people are interested. So Alex, wanted to pass over to you, as obviously this is an area we've been focusing on, just to talk a little bit more about what we're doing at XY Sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been such a fascinating journey. I've wanted to ask a million questions as well, Stanton. So lots that I want to touch on that overlap with where you've been talking. But I guess to start, to think about what the reason why XY Sense exists in our mission, it's really to help understand and transform the world's built environment. And we're doing that using 100% anonymous real-time data. That data currently is occupancy sensors, but as of very recently, we're augmenting that to have more information about what's going on in the space. And the reason why we're doing all of this is because we want to create office environments that are smarter, that are more human, and that we can really deliver ROI for the operational spend. Buildings are expensive. Buildings are expensive to maintain. And at the end of the day, the commercial office world are there to enable people to do their jobs better, whether that's minimizing the friction in the workplace for people to interact, or whether that's to make the air quality, highlight it when it's not great, and help improve upon it. And when you combine the two and you think about the built environment, 40% of the world's carbon emissions actually come from the built environment. So it's a massive contributor to worldwide emissions. And then if you think about from the data we see across the 20 countries we're installed in, 3 days a week, offices are pretty busy, but then the other days, they're not really being used at all. And yet they're heated, cleaned, lit, all of that with so much energy expenditure. So that's really why we're trying to unlock insights into how buildings are actually being used and how they're performing. So for years, we've committed to delivering what we see as the most accurate, biggest range coverage and real-time occupancy sensor available to really give fine-grained insights to power in decision-making. We also know, though, that there's more to creating exceptional workplaces than just space utilization. Healthy buildings create healthy teams and healthier business bottom lines. So that's why we've expanded our platform to incorporate air quality as well. So we now integrate our occupancy sensor data with 2 leading air quality solution providers from around the world, Airthings and Kythera. Both are fantastic solutions, and across the 20 countries we're installed in the enterprises we're installed in, we often see Airthings and Kythera already measuring the data. So from one area, we're capturing air quality data, and from another, we're capturing real-time occupancy data. To put the two together, it really enables you to level up and unlock new insights from the two. So now, if you've been listening carefully, you should be experts in all the different types of metrics for what can be measured in air quality and comfort. We'll be giving you a quiz at the end. Stanton will have a test for everyone. But these sensors are, from Kythera and Airthings are able to measure continually all of the metrics we were just talking about, whether it's PM 2.5, carbon dioxide, and volatile organic compounds. On top of that, they also augment that data with more of the comfort style metrics, which are humidity, temperature, and also noise, and even potentially light as well. So when you combine all that information, that enables you to assess the performance of the air quality, as well as to assess the performance of the comfort. But when you combine air quality, comfort, and occupancy metrics together, that's when we really get excited about the capabilities. So I can't remember the term, but we saw the graph before from Stanton where I think it was at the washout phase, where you're about to have your occupants move into the building and you measure the air quality and it's great. And then occupants come into the building and you need to maintain that. But one thing about managing airflow throughout a building is it's actually incredibly expensive and a difficult thing to do and maintain. If you can understand where your occupants are, you don't need to heat and cool and run air through spaces where there are no people. And you can also look at where the air quality gets bad, where there are people. If it's a Friday and you've got 5% utilization and your air quality index is extremely low, well, frankly, it doesn't really matter if you've got no people in those spaces. It's where to focus those efforts and be able to really clinically be able to understand high occupancy and correlating that to poor air quality. And surprise, surprise, from our deployments already, we're seeing it's quite logical. There is a really big correlation between when there are a lot of people in the space, you see the comfort metrics go down and you see the air quality metrics go down as well. So our clients will be able to, using our new technology, ensure that healthy, well-ventilated offices for teams, monitoring air quality across all the different types of spaces to create comfortable working environments. We'll be able to help optimize the building performance to identify spaces that require attention, as well as HVAC irregularities and other issues affecting air quality. We'll also be able to combine historical trends to see the correlation between occupancy and where there are people, and historically where the air quality has been bad. And then with this data captured, by putting air quality sensors in that are continuously monitoring, you'll be able to understand proactively the air quality to receive and maintain certifications such as WELL, Fitwell, LEED, Reset, and UL. And then on the comfort side, everyone has a different idea of what's good temperature and what's bad and noisy and quiet. But by democratizing that data and enabling people to actually see what the comfort levels are and where comfort levels become bad potentially for everyone when they're high occupants, having that data available in real time is really powerful.
Yeah, and I think as well, like from the beta customers we've had trialing some of this, seeing the care and attention for, we want to put in more desks, but how is it going to impact our air quality? And actually surfacing this data together has already been, we've seen facilities teams just their eyes light up when we show them some of the dashboards of what's currently available. So seeing the real world applications and just the desire for companies and workplace teams who really are passionate about providing solutions like this has been great.
Yeah, for sure. So, and what we're looking at here is one of our live real-time dashboards. So for an office space to be able to see, as Stanton pointed out before, it's not just about the VOC right now, it's about the trending of the metrics. So you can see here on the right, it's maybe a little small, but when you look at what is good and bad in a space, we have an overall comfort index and an overall indoor air quality index, as well as what indices are trending bad. And you're able to see that over time. And as I mentioned before, one thing that's quite difficult is to decipher what is good and what's bad. And the way we do that is we break it down into 3 categories. So good, acceptable, and poor. And then you're able to understand as their trends. So using these new air quality integrations, our clients will be able to access rich insights and also not just the live data we saw before, but reports across office floors, across buildings, across all of the deployment that give insights into the air quality index, the comfort scores, visualizations, so you can see on a floor plan where is good and where is bad. And then looking by different days of the week, different floors, different locations, basically being able to drill and dice the data in any way. And then to be able to look and see trends across time to see if there's anything that can be done, and that's systemic. On top of that, actually being able to look at notifications of when the, say the VOC is bad for a period, or when the air quality does become unacceptable, being able to actually register for alerts to be notified upon the change. So it's really powerful stuff, having both of the sets of data in one platform. We've already seen companies use this data to redesign spaces, to optimize ventilation, to fine tune and troubleshoot where things are bad, and really to achieve better space utilization. But for me, it's really important to be doing that where there are people, where there are occupants. Trying to optimize air quality across a whole building is a very difficult problem, and focusing the efforts, fine tuning where there are people based on utilization, really enables that intersection to occur and the most dramatic impact.
That's awesome. Thanks, Alex. Great overview. I think we've really gone on the journey in this webinar of the basics of air quality to then using air quality with occupancy data. So like where I'd love to take this conversation now is how does one get started with air quality? We actually know a lot of companies are already doing that, and maybe you're looking at it, okay, well, we've got some data maybe, or maybe we need to reassess the type of data we are collecting. But I think it's like we're approaching the end of 2024. It's crazy to think, but Stanton, from your perspective, like how are companies approaching that in this air quality as a metric they want to cover and implement kind of at this space and time, kind of end of 2024, moving into 2025?
From our experience, what we've seen the most is you have to start somewhere. And the easiest way to start is to start measuring. Because without any kind of data, it's hard to determine what kind of solutions you need to implement and what kind of costs are involved with your budget. The hard part with that, and this was actually asked in the question, was if you have this data, how do you kind of collect this data without people knowing? Because if the data shows up and it's not good, you don't really want other people to know before you have the budget to solve it. And we've seen a lot of scenarios where it's kind of discreetly installed, like a monitor is discreetly installed somewhere to get a baseline to understand what's going on first, before trying to figure out if our air quality is already okay, not a big issue, but if it's not good, what are the solutions then? Is there even a company in our area who can do the solutions? That's actually something that we saw as some difficulty, where there are certain areas around the world where they kind of purchased monitors from another area around the world, and they had the monitors installed. They didn't have a solution for it after they discovered there was small issues. And so I think there needs to be a slight kind of evolution with how a lot of companies think about these things, which is it's going to be iterative, and having a data layer first is going to help you solve for the future.
Yeah, awesome. And then Alex, is there any learnings you found in any of the projects that XY Sense has been involved in, of anything you'd like to share of learnings or how different companies are approaching this?
Yeah, a couple. I guess the first point is it is obvious, but where there are more people in a building, there's a greater potential for comfort and air quality to reduce. And we're definitely seeing that correlation in the data. So I was in a building in London recently, brand new building that was a victim of its own success, in that everyone wanted to be in the building and utilization was super high. And the biggest concerns they had was airflow and air quality, because they designed such a great building that they needed to fine tune the airflow to be able to cater for the number of people coming in. So by having air quality sensors installed, by being able to see the number of people coming in, it really empowered them to enact change upon that. So yeah, I guess it is simple when you think about it, but you've got a lot of people in a building. Of course, the air quality is going to degrade, and you really need to fine tune and understand how your airflow is traveling across the building and how it can be improved.
Yeah, awesome. And I think it's like similar to kind of what Stanton said of like start somewhere. And I think we see that with occupancy as well. These are kind of new categories that are getting thrown on workplace leaders and heads of real estate to now manage these data sources. They never had these data sources before. So it is quite acceptable to start small and like that, see what data you can be getting from these systems, because it is quite a new category and solution for quite a number of these internal workplace teams to have to solve for. And then Stanton, is there anything of like, always like to look at sharing learnings with people of like, where do companies go wrong in this, or where can we give advice to the people watching this webinar of these are the learnings we found? Again, like as I said, it is quite a new approach that companies are taking, but where are the pitfalls and what should some of the viewers look out for?
I'm going to mention something that's more kind of holistic, because if you're trying to solve for air quality, it's actually quite straightforward. All the solutions are relatively simple. It's about having a budget and then also having the solutions kind of available to you. So the thing that I would like to just mention again is, and this is the message that we all have, you have to start at some point, and getting started is better than nothing. And if you think there's going to be risk, for example, if you're a hospital and trying to do this, you have a lot more liability. But if you don't solve for it, that liability will catch up to you at some point, because this is becoming more and more of it's not a new topic anymore. It's becoming more of a general education. So if you don't start, what's going to happen is you get sued, possibly, or there's more and more complaints, either from, if you're a landlord, your tenants are complaining, they're considering moving to other buildings, or if you're employer and you have an office, you get complaints from your team, and that results in lower productivity because they're focusing on things that you don't want them to focus on. So this is more, I think, in the long term, in terms of compliance and everything, it will become more and more important. And having a early start, because the investment of initial monitoring is not very high. Getting started is better than nothing.
Yeah, awesome. Some fantastic points here. I've really enjoyed this conversation, but I think what we want to do is, we are nearing the end of the hour we have allocated, but just want to summarize a lot of the points, and hopefully we'll have time for a few Q&As. I've seen some questions coming through over the hour, which is awesome. But just to summarize, and Alex and Stanton as well, would love to get your inputs as well here. So what we kind of want to summarize, things to consider when you're getting started, is the real-time monitoring versus the periodic testing. I think we've kind of explained that quite a lot, of the value of not doing set and forget, but how do you continuously monitor this to see trends, so you can't manipulate the outcomes, which is obviously not what we want, because it's not for the greater good. I think like that end state of like the integration with building systems, of like, we're gathering this data, what are we looking to do with it, of like the inputs into building systems. And there's so much you can do with technology these days and the IoT space, that it is, okay, what does the future look like? What's that 5-10 year strategy as it comes to smart building strategies? Because air quality and occupancy are definitely going to impact into there. The ease and use of data and accessibility. So like, Alex, what would you like to highlight as the main points under that?
Well, I mean, echoing Stanton's comment before, start somewhere. Crawl, walk, run is what we often say. And some of our customers have spent over $1 billion a year on real estate around the world, an incredible, mind-boggling number. And then you think the average utilization that we're seeing across workpoints, across our data set, is under 40%. I think 38 or 37% across the 20 countries. There's definitely insights that can be had by starting small and deploying sensors in a space or one or two spaces, to then be able to grow beyond that to unlock more insights. But we talk about vectors of value and doubling down on investment to be able to leverage a sensor for more than one purpose. So being able to capture and understand air quality and being able to do it easily, then being able to consume that data in an easy format can be done on a floor, and you can understand what the outcomes are from that floor. But you're probably less likely to then take the next step and integrate it into your building to dynamically change the airflow. So that's where you get the crawl, walk, run, and incrementally adopt an approach that then unlocks more vectors of value across different facets to really maximize the return on investment from this.
Yeah, awesome. And then the other thing to consider is a lot of the compliance and certification requirements, where we see companies and landlords going after certifications like WELL, Reset, LEED. So Stanton, any key things we want to leave our viewers with on some of the compliance and certification for IAQ?
I think certifications are really good as guidance for what you should be thinking about. The one thing I will stress is there is a difference between using certification for marketing versus using certification to actually improve the building. So just having that separate as internal conversations for what you're trying to achieve will result in better kind of a better result at the end in terms of what you're trying to go for.
Yeah, awesome point. And then also with different sensor technologies like air quality, we talked about like filtration with air quality as well, but Stanton, anything to call out on like the recalibration and accuracy of air quality sensors?
They've evolved a lot, so they're significantly better now than before in terms of their how long they can last. The typical thing to really think about, just is there a way to check to see if the monitor is still accurate? And most monitor manufacturers will have kind of performance check or just some way to check to see whether or not they're still accurate. And if they are, you can keep using them. And because if you're in a very clean space, it's likely that the monitor will last longer. If you're in a very polluted space, it's likely that the life will be slightly shorter. So the main thing is talk to your manufacturer, understand what the results look like. If numbers are way off, then that's probably when it needs to be recalibrated. If the numbers across a project look very similar, then it's probably still okay.
Awesome. And then the last point we have is integration into your workplace data strategy. So again, we kind of touched on this already of like, what's the end state and what's the bigger picture? There's data available from almost every platform available to workplace leaders, which sometimes can be overwhelming, but looking at, okay, what do we want to accomplish with air quality? I think like Stanton made a great point at the start of like, start measuring before you have a drastic plan of how you're surfacing that to all the employees in a space, because it can actually set off alarm bells, rather than if you don't actually have a strategy of how you're going to attack anything that does come up with the system. So we always think of integration, and you want to be putting in technologies that are going to work and talk to each other as well when you're looking at implementing technology across your workplace. So the Q&A, we've just run out of time. I've seen there's some have come through as well over the chat, which I think Stanton has actually tried to verbalize as well in some of what he's been saying, which is awesome. But what I would encourage those watching to do is you can reach out to any of the speakers here on LinkedIn. There's QR codes here if that helps you to get in contact, or you should have everyone's names to find LinkedIn, etc. if you don't already have any of our contact details. But would highly encourage the conversations to continue. It is quite a fantastic topic. We could stay here all day and discuss some of the things that air quality is going to have an impact on. But that's been all that we have time for today. But thank you everyone for attending, and stay in touch.
Thanks, Shivaun.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Stan.
Thank you very much.